back. So before we continue, let's just get an overview about all these crazy things we have running at once right now in order to do development. First of all, you have a web server that's going to control your front end. Now that's the first tier we are going to talk about. Now the first tier, if we go to our code base, is the Angular tier. That's where we write all our components that we are going to use to kind of create this web page right here. That's the first tier we have available. The second tier that we're using right now is our backend tier. Our backend tier is the NestJS application. And again, if we go to the code base, that's where we have all our gateway, that's where we have our core, that's where we have all the code that we're going to use in order to communicate and talk to the front end to get data, right? That's where we have our gateway, as I said. So let's have a look at the gateway. This is the access point for the front end to start getting data from the back end, right? So that's the second tier we're talking about right here. So the Angular application is going to communicate to this back end right here as we have it set up right now. So in order to start this one, we have to run a command. In order to start this one, we have to run a command. And the final thing we have in our setup is now Docker setting up our database. Now the backend needs to somehow store the data, and in real life, the data will not be stored on the backend. It'll be stored on some kind of database server somewhere. Now in our setup, the database server is going to be inside Docker. And in the production ready setup, when we are going to put all of this in production, it's actually going to be on a service called Heroku. We are also going to add the backend server on Heroku, and the final one we're going to use, we're going to put the front-end server that's going to be on Firebase. So now you have these 3 different tiers that we're working with, and let's just say you got into work this morning, you got your first cup of coffee, you're sitting down to get started with your development, and let me just show you how you would start all of this in order to get started with your work setup. So first what I'll do is I'll jump into the backend code, and here what I want to start first is going to be my database, my Docker environment. So the first command I'll run inside my terminal right here is going to be docker compose up. Boom. Now that means we're going to start this part right here, the tier number 3, the Docker setup for actually working with our database. Now that is up and running, and we can start the second tier. The second tier is, of course, the backend, so let's try and run that one. I'll jump into a new terminal right here, and I'll just run the npm run start like we talked about earlier, and that means now we've started our second tier of our current setup, meaning that this guy is now running, and he can now communicate to the database through that system that we set up. We'll build that in the next lesson, but now you know why we started this one up. The third one we're going to start up is the front end. So the front end can communicate to the back end, that communicates to Postgres. So let's try and go back and just run that one as well. Now I'm inside the front end code, and in the front end I'll do this ng serve right here. Now we have everything running for our daily work. And with this all running, we can either go and change code in the front end, we can change code in the back end, and we can go and actually manipulate the database if we want to do that. But everything should now be running. Let's just try and go and see if the front end is running. There we go. Let's try and see if we can add a dude. Let's call him June. Oh, he called it John anyway. Fair enough. We have everything running. And I just wanted to give you guys that overview because sometimes I feel there's a lot going on, and actually there is a lot going on. And the reason is we have these 3 different tiers communicating, and you just have to understand as we move forward, it's very easy to change the tier. If we don't want to use Postgres, you want to use MS SQL, we can just change this tier. If we don't want to use Angular as front end, we want to use React, we can just change this tier. If we really don't like using NestJS, we want to use a C# backend, we can just change the tier. So they are all working together, but they're using interfaces or they're using contracts to communicate with each other, and that's all we have to understand. So I just want to give you the very high level overview on what we're actually doing right now. Now let's jump back into NestJS in the next lesson and start working out how we can actually communicate between these 2 guys right here. So that's it for this lesson. See you next time. Bye.